Well, hello and welcome to yet another edition of CrossWorlds, the program where we look at the greater metaverse, the future of metaverse, the world beyond the obvious, places like Second Life and OpenSim, but way beyond that too. My guest tonight is Bruce Joy. Bruce Joy is both the CEO of Vastpark, which is a platform that's been around for a few years now, and he's also behind a new open source project called OpenAvatar, which we'll be talking about later. So welcome to the program, Bruce.
Thanks very much, Mel. Nice to be here.
Right. I think the best place to start, actually, because many of our viewers may not be familiar with Vastpark itself, is if you just sort of give a brief introduction to yourself and explain how the Vastpark platform works.
No problem. Okay, so I got started on this project back in the late 90s as an idea, basically looking at thinking that games like Quake at the time had fantastic technology and were doing things that the rest of the web was not doing because it was allowing people to connect. I thought, wouldn't that be great if we were actually running the web with this sort of technology so anybody could have their own environments that they could connect to other friends' environments and therefore have a kind of web of worlds. And so this is what started me down this path. The focus was not about creating, say, an MMO type experience where it was a very, very large environment that was one mesh, you could say, or one grid. But it was this more webbish environment where anyone could have their own environment and link them to others. And so I got started in 2003, and things have progressed from there. We, along the way, in 2007, if you may remember, by that point, Second Life had changed from being this lovely little creative community to being on everybody's lips in the media and so forth, and so lots of brands were coming in, and it seemed to me that was going to be a short-lived bubble, which it basically turned out to be, and I didn't realize how much damage it would do to the kind of community or experience or so forth that a lot of people felt at the time, but what I did think was that it wasn't really the place for corporates in the future. And I wanted to do something that was more useful. So instead of thinking of just individuals connecting these environments together, I was starting to think about how enterprises could do projects and use it for work-related things, because I felt that the killer application, you could say, in business was something like virtual operations rooms and ways of viewing 3D models that related to the enterprise. It might be their buildings, it might be their monitoring their equipment. But yeah, that was the sort of thing that started to interest me. So that's a bit of a background of how we sort of morphed the idea from me originally thinking it was for people to just create small environments to businesses doing the same sort of thing.
And you now, well, you've got quite a big client list, haven't you? You've got a lot of sort of fairly high-profile American military and people like that.
Well, we moved into the US arena last year. So 2010, we established a subsidiary in the US, and we kicked off with getting a couple of Fortune 500 companies on board, and so it's been a quite a wild ride in a sense for a small organization and running our own technology. I think what's different to a lot of people who are building off Unity or something like that is that we're building off a platform that we've built ourselves, and therefore we've had to build the entire thing from the networking through to everything else. And so for a small team, it's been a significant challenge. But the great thing is that as everything matures, we really get to choose our own destiny, and I think that's going to be great for us going forward. The other thing I should say, unlike most platforms that are just focused on virtual worlds, we have two strings to our bow. We focus partially on the virtual worlds and partially on communities of practice and a web-based social networking platform for enterprise. So the two together, I think, combine to make something interesting, because for some organizations, they're not really ready for the virtual worlds experience, but they are ready for a community of practice. And some are not focused on creating, say, internal change through transparency, the transparency that's created by having a community of practice where there's a flat hierarchy, but they're moving towards that. Most organizations are moving towards greater transparency. So therefore, having those two technologies and seeing them play off each other has been important for us so far, but we're really at just the very beginnings of what we're going to be able to do with that.
You mentioned how businesses, the buzz was Second Life for a while and then faded away, and I've always thought that with Second Life in particular, they you really have to understand these platforms. So
right.
If a business wants to have a showroom somewhere, then a vast public arena like Second Life is an obvious place, but you don't build the factory there. And I'm quite curious about Vastpark's clientele, as it were. Do you find that it's mostly the factories or the behind the scenes businesses you're servicing, or are there any like your customers also using it for public interfacing?
Right. Okay. So that it's interesting who turns up to say, "Hey, we'd like to do something with you," and sometimes people do turn up wanting to do public-facing projects. We have one at the moment that's quite interesting. That's not out, but we'll see where that goes. And it's particularly it's very public facing, and we're just figuring out the technology at the moment. Now, one possibility is we've got a new web player, and so the web player can embed obviously the 3D environment straight into any browser. Today, that's just on the PC, but December we're meant to release the Mac version. So that'll be quite exciting to see that on a public project. But I would say, yeah, you're right that we are focused on the factory rather than the showroom, by and large. I think that's going to shift. If you look at Vastpark.com at the moment, one of the top, what do you say? You see on the front page is talking about showing 3D objects or 3D emulations of equipment that a company has built, and so we're seeing that is something that we can build out for salespeople to use on a laptop where they're going and talking with a customer, and instead of having to take the equipment there, they're actually taking this demo and actually running people through it. And we see a future for that in support as well, where this actually emulates that whatever that device is, and you can have somebody who's hundreds of kilometers away or miles away, depending where you are in the world, who's actually using this virtual emulation of the actual tool and saying to support, hey, I don't know how I do this, and support showing them how to do it, or giving that to other staff before they're actually allowed on the actual equipment, and it's a training device. So I see things like that as kind of having multiple uses, and perhaps people will start to embed them in their websites in the future as we become able to deliver a more ubiquitous experience.
This is something I've noticed quite a lot, actually, is in terms of skills training, the use of virtual worlds, where you can literally eliminate the danger at the training stage. You can take high-risk occupations, you can play around with dangerous equipment virtually, and you can perfect your technique before you actually risk your life and limb, so to speak, with the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hadn't really focused on training. In fact, it effectively is something that we're really just starting now. I mean, it's not to say that it wasn't being used that way, but in terms of our technology, we didn't have a scenario generator or something like that. And so what we've got a project at the moment that's it's actually enabling nurses to do diagnosis on avatars. So, and the idea is that a trainer can come into an environment and essentially drop scenarios onto different avatars, so that those avatars will then respond in certain ways, and it's meant to replicate the kind of complexity that a nurse or a doctor has when they're trying to fish for information, and they may get a whole range of information that may distract them from figuring out exactly what that person has. But if they understand the clues well, then they will get to a good diagnosis. And so I think once we've finalized that technology, and it's meant to be kind of a markup language for scenarios, then I think that's going to be fantastic, because people will be able to essentially program a whole range of dynamic scenarios that they can drop on a range of subjects, and so multiple scenarios can be running in an environment at the same time and be dropped on at any time. That's the idea of it anyway. So that'll mean that we're then very ready to do a lot more of this training and simulation work that it seems to be what we what's really appropriate for what we're looking at for our audience, because they want to do a lot of that.
When a new customer comes to you, so to speak, do you have a kind of arsenal of templates and stuff they can use for their world or their space, as it were, at the moment, or does it tend to be?
We do. We have a few. We have a few templates. We have quite a range of content that we have, and it's actually very easy and quick to build things out. You don't build in world the way you do in Second Life. We have an actual creator tool that's sort of like Dreamweaver. We've mirrored the way web developers work. So you have this creator tool where it has a design experience and then a code experience, and the code is very much it's a very simple XML markup language, and allows you to swap things around. So if you are somebody who has a bit of programming behind you, you'd be very happy working in that environment. Or if you're a designer, you're going to prefer to work in the design view. until you're comfortable with the markup.
Right, now coming back, we're still on the Vastpark bit of this, as it were. Something you mentioned a few minutes ago was the embeddable side of this. Like you can take a Vastpark, an immersive space that's built on Vastpark, and you, as well as using the Vastpark viewer, you can now view it on a standard web page as an embed.
Right.
And this is something that has sparked a lot of interest. We even discussed it last week with the Open Sims. I'm one of these people, and I keep saying it, that I prefer that wonderful metaphor of living in a virtual space. And if I want to pull up web pages and stuff like that, I prefer to do it from the virtual environment. But clearly, there are people who want to do it from the web, and we can't deny that windows on the web into virtual worlds are a very good way of getting people in. Embedding a Vastpark scenario, for example, on a Facebook page and inviting your Facebook friends over to join you in that space is a fairly obvious way to promote, your space, even if there are later options for getting a more fully fledged experience. But I'm quite curious. The Vastpark client, for example, the viewing client is a plugin, isn't it, or an independent viewer? But it's a fairly small download.
Right. Yeah. It's 5 megabytes. I think it's a fraction under that these days. Yeah, that's right. Well, I think we're at a really exciting point where a range of technologies are appearing that mean that, in fact, we need plugins less and less because the major ones have the technology we need. So Flash has a lot better 3D support in its newest version, and same with Silverlight. And so this is, really just changing month by month right at the moment as those technologies start to be adopted. And you've got WebGL doing really well with the browsers marching forward as quickly as they are. So you can go into Chrome and be running a whole range of WebGL projects, and they're running really quickly. They're not running as smoothly from what I've seen in Firefox yet, because I think that Google are in a kind of arms race on ensuring that WebGL is very well supported. Once that's also supported on Internet Explorer, which is still the dominant browser that we have to deal with for enterprise, then if that occurs, that would be absolutely fantastic. If it doesn't occur, then we could be essentially thinking of utilizing a mixture of WebGL and Silverlight, or our own plugin for the future, where pretty much everyone, at least on a desktop, is able to get to experience 3D close to natively in a browser. And I think what that opens up is the possibility that 3D spaces can become much like video streaming. And so instead of thinking that they always have to be like multiplayer or multi-user, a lot of them can start with, like I was describing to you before, these use cases where an organization wants to put up a model of, say, their car, but it's not just a model that you can spin. It's a model you can click on the doors and the doors open. You can fly in. You can look at the dashboard. The whole dashboard is interactive. Maybe you can take it for a drive. Maybe you can invite friends in and have them sit in the seat next to you. So it's these kinds of like experiences that start off quite small, but you can maybe extend them yourself, that I think start to get to some of the promise that many of us were thinking about at the beginning well, 10 years ago or more. Some people have been thinking a lot about this for 20 odd years. I've been thinking about it for 15.
Yeah, this is the practical side of the ideology, isn't it?
Right, it is. Yeah, it's not VRML. It's actually fast, and it's actually coming to a browser near you right now.
And the other big thing, actually, as a total sideline, I was reading up today on some of the Microsoft announcements about Windows 8 and how they're actually going to be abandoning not only Flash but their own Silverlight in the new Internet Explorer thing. And it's very complicated. But
yes.
we are seeing this move to pad computing and things as a sort of somewhere between the mobile and the desktop, which I wouldn't say it's a wonderful workstation to create things on, but I mean, as an instantly accessible format. I mean, the idea that we can put worlds on these, pad screens, and people can enter a shop maybe and see something on display and literally explore it in 3D. Through some kind of tagging system. I mean, lots of this is augmented reality, of course, but you can really investigate the product, as it were. And I can really see this working for the take-up of virtual worlds, or at least immersive spaces, because you're not trying to sell the space. You're tying it to a product that people are interested in already, whether it's something that they are already keen on or something that you're just tempting them with. And so, if they go into a shop and they see this wonderful gadget and they can explore it and work it in 3D before they bought it, they're hooked, aren't they? Rather than...
Well, yeah, I think that, if say there's a new Audi and people are passionate about Audis, for instance, and Audi allow people to embed that 3D object in other web pages. So now Audi enthusiasts can be talking about that particular model and actually having that model in such a way that they can interact with it right in the page. Now, if any of them are able to kind of hack up the that embed code so that you can determine, say, where the camera begins, that might be an expert process to create those kind of like virtual bookmarks. But then again, if the platform supports that out of the box, that's going to be a pretty powerful offering to enable people to decide where the camera starts. So they can start that conversation with people. It might be a feature that they like, they don't like, but it creates discussions and relevance where people are able to drive the experience for each other. And then others are able to jump onto it and take over from there and have their own personal experience in that 3D environment right next to the forum discussing it. I think that's the sort of thing we're going to see a lot of on the web. And I don't know how long that's going to take before that's like that, but at least the technology pieces are essentially here now, and they have not been here. And that's an extraordinary thing for us as an industry.
Okay, now one of the other things that I think, while we're on Vastpark, is that your addressing system for the worlds themselves, whenever I've watched the player and things, Vastpark from the very start has utilized the sort of equivalent of an URL protocol, hasn't it? Instead of... in Second Life, we teleport around and you can copy what's called the slurl. People can click on that on the web, but it always launches the Second Life client. So it's not a universally good thing in a way. Whereas Vastpark, in the player itself, you can literally put in the address of a new environment and hop over to it, can't you?
Right. So somebody can grab our server, the Vastpark server, run it on a computer. Port, actually point a URL at it, and then hand that out as an address to people to go and connect with it using the Vastpark player or the web player, and it works, right? So basically, anyone in just a couple of minutes can actually set one of those things up. We need to create some videos and show people how exactly to do that. But it's actually extremely simple. I'm not a very technical person these days. I walked away from that sort of stuff a long time ago. I don't program anymore. I'm certainly able to, double click on a server install and then run through a wizard and set up something like that myself. So I think it's pretty easy. And yes, that comes back to that idea of a web of worlds that I had in the late 90s. And right from the beginning, we were always thinking of it as using HTTP as an addressing system. What we do support is like Skype. You can say Skype : and then put a username in, and because you're a browser like Firefox supports MIME types. If you click on that Skype link, it'll actually open up Skype because it looks in the directory, figures out the application that link's designed for. We have something like that. We have something called VP. So if you put a VP link in, any user into a web page, any user who's got the Vastpark player will receive that link, and they'll open up the Vastpark player. So otherwise, it's really just an HTTP link.
Mentioning the fact that you can change locations in Vastpark simply by typing the equivalent of an URL. Maybe this would be the time to move on to get you to explain what OpenAvatar is all about and the way that would work.
Sure. Okay. So, OpenAvatar came out of our frustration that there was no really high-quality open library or system for creating avatars. And in fact, avatars generally outside of Second Life are very poorly done. And, people who aren't necessarily Second Life users may look and say that Second Life doesn't have fantastic avatars. I think Second Life does have fantastic avatars, and probably anyone who's using OpenSim sees it that way as well, because they gesture very well, and it's nicely done code. It's one of the best things that Second Life has had from the get-go. But there's not a standard, an open standard for doing these things, and there's not an open software developers kit for creating them. There was some commercial, or there are some commercial ones. One of them that we were working with is called Evolver, and you can find that at evolver.com. And that's just congratulations to the guys from Evolver. That they've been bought by Autodesk. So that's now an Autodesk company, which is great. But they're not you go.
I'll just add there, because I noticed this in the press just the last few days, is that although Autodesk had bought them, the Evolver company is now actually providing free avatars in formats that were actually costing money to download, for presumably until Autodesk decide what they're doing with it. So it's a real bonus there at the moment. But as you say, Vastpark used Evolve for quite a while, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And there's no reason you can't use Evolver avatars inside of Vastpark and a few other platforms. But they were expensive, and we weren't completely satisfied with the body shapes and things like this, and we wanted to be able to control our own destiny. And we felt like, we're just one of a whole bunch of mesh-based virtual worlds and game platforms. There's thousands of these platforms out there. So why don't, if we're going to actually go to the trouble of doing it, and we're going to do it properly, then why not do it in such a way that others can also grab that and extend it? And we knew that one of the challenges of building an open avatar software developers kit is that many different many different platforms have a different idea of what a avatar should look like in terms of the quality. You know, how many polygons is an avatar? How many bones does an avatar have, and how are the bones named, and these sorts of things. So we did not want to come up with a specification that said, hey, this is how you do bones, and this is how you do a rig, and this is how you this is the quality that you get out of it. We wanted to create something that allowed you to bring along your rigs, and so define your standard type of avatar. So that was the kind of the design criteria. So rather than thinking about it as OpenAvatar being a specification for creating for avatars, it's really more a way of you building standardized avatars around your standard. Okay, so that's quite important to say, because otherwise, you know, from a developer point of view, it's you know, what we've tried to do is sounds like we're stating exactly what an avatar should look like and how it should, you know, work, which we've not done. So if somebody is trying to create a new game platform that's got avatars, utilizing OpenAvatar's SDK or software developer kit is going to simplify the process incredibly, because we've already they just have to put in their rig and parameters, and it's going to start to pop out avatars for them. Now, how does that work? Well, basically, you can define, as I say, the rig that's going to get used for your avatars, and artists can then create portions of bodies, avatar bodies, that then snap onto that rig. And that means that users can come along, see a library full of body parts, and pick the parts and the add-ons, you know, glasses or whatever else, and click on them to snap them together as their avatar, their completely custom avatar, and then save that, and then that automatically gets generated as a final avatar for that particular user and handed back to them. And it's all done using Collada. So for those of you that don't know what Collada is a fantastic interchange format for 3D models. And what it means is that if I have a Collada file, I can import that into tools like 3D Studio Max, Blender, and a whole range of other tools. And if I've got my model inside of one of those tools, it's a proprietary space, and if I want it to come out and put it into something else, I can export it back as a Collada file and then go and take it into some other tool or into some game platform or virtual world platform like Vastpark. So that's very, very powerful, obviously, because prior to us having Collada, we affected the game industry, which has been driving, you know, real-time 3D models, has not had a standard way of doing a art pipeline. And to create your own art pipeline for a game, if you go back, say, 6 years ago, was a really big part of the pain of building that new game. And so every time you increase the quality on your games, you had to build this new pipeline around how you're using your tools and how you're connecting that with your render engine. And you would have whole teams working just on the art pipeline. Collada comes along and it solves so many of the challenges by standardization around this format. So we're working with that standard in our platform. And this means that our platform, Unity, and many, many other platforms are going to support the Collider content. Just as a side note, even though Collider is this wonderful interchange format, and it can be used as the file to use at runtime for presenting the object to the audience, it's not necessarily the best runtime format for a number of reasons. It's designed as an interchange format, not necessarily a runtime format. So it's not necessarily stripped down to the bare essentials that might suit a game engine that wants to run it as quickly as it can. So usually in any game that you got, you're what's being called by the renderer is not a Collider shape. It's a Collider model. It's actually being converted before the release of that game from Collider into some runtime model format. And that's important for a few different reasons. One, because it makes the file smaller and faster to open, so there can be more content without your machine slowing down. But also from the creator's point of view, because if end users were being given Collider files, they could then open them in their 3D programs, and so all the intellectual property that went into building that model would essentially be given away. And you look at how things work in Second Life, and Second Life artists can make a bit of money out of building this content. So it's really important to protect the rights of the artist by having some protected proprietary and runtime format for important bits of art that the artist cares about it not being stolen.
So I was just going to interrupt here and say that, I mean, as far as Second Life's concerned, mesh availability is the big news at the moment. I mean, it's been available in the main client for a couple of weeks, and for somebody who hasn't actually upgraded yet, I mean, all I see are lots of strange blobs on the here's the new kit displays. But clearly it has taken off. Obviously, a lot of people have been playing with this in advance and have all their clothing and kit and builds and stuff ready. And this is obviously a very good example, because some instances of OpenSim also support mesh, even though they don't have the latest Linden code. And in the case of Linden Labs, there is a very finicky process for actually importing the mesh. You've got to go through a little training course to satisfy them. They know what you're doing. And then there is a very, it's a bit techy for me, but there is a very specific way you actually have to treat the files, the Collider files, as you bring them into Second Life. There's a lot of factors that have to be tweaked, how far away from it is before it draws and stuff like that, and how it economizes on. They've got something called the prim equivalent to actually budget for the sort of weight of these objects. But so obviously mesh has come to the OpenSim, subsequently, ultimately the hypergrid, which is the way OpenSim worlds connect with each other, and to walled gardens like in Worlds and Second Life. But when you first described OpenAvatar to me, I was quite curious, because I could see that having one of these open avatars and preparing it, as it were, with all its component parts, it would be, I wouldn't be able to walk into Second Life with it, but I would probably be able to import it as a mesh, so at least I had a copy of a transportable avatar in Second Life. But the other half of this, which I'm even more keen on, is the fact that OpenAvatar could actually be totally transportable. In other words, although I could import a copy into Second Life, in other places I would literally be able to move around freely with that avatar. So the obvious thing that occurs to me here is that presumably some system like this would have to operate somehow the assets that are part, to simplify here, the assets that are part of the OpenAvatar system will presumably need to be on independent servers that can be accessed by multiple places that I would choose to go with that avatar. Is that right?
Right, exactly. So so somebody can take the SDK and actually build a service around that and have a series of component parts that they or other artists have built, and they can have a number. Well, they're building this one Collada file, and they could take that further so that users don't have to manually take it and import it to Second Life and an OpenSim that supports Mesh and Vastpark and Unity, but they could in fact be offering a service that not only builds the Collada file but also builds the relevant files and serves those relevant files up for, say, something like Vastpark, so that it becomes that can just be the end user would just get a URL for where their avatar is, say for Vastpark, and they just insert that as here's my personal avatar's URL, and everything is taken care of. Vastpark, we are not having to serve up that avatar; it's coming from that service, and that's what causes it to come in world. And I think that's probably the direction that ultimately any of the more open platforms that are purely URL based for their assets, they don't, they're not trying to control everything. It's going to work like that, and so that's going to be very, very easy to make reuse occur. It can all happen behind the scenes because I could have a passport for virtual worlds that includes my standard URLs for a range of for my avatar or my avatar service, and the avatar service could automatically build out a new avatar for a new platform that comes along. So if I wanted to go to that platform, I'm coming with my own avatar automatically, and I definitely think that's where we're headed for the future, because things will become more distributed and more open, so that pretty much any web developer out there who today is setting up videos and so forth, they're going to be able to create essentially virtual worlds and call it their own platform.
Yes, my guest here last week was a lady called Maria Kovalov of Hypergrid Business.
Yes, I know Maria.
And we were, we're talking about a whole range of things, but one of the things we were talking about was the idea at the moment with the hypergrid, for example, you can transport virtual goods from one grid to another via your inventory. While they're in your inventory, they are still belong to the grid, your home grid. When you res them on a grid, a copy enters the inventory of the new grid you're in. Obviously, this doesn't work with Second Life because it's a walled garden, as are in Worlds and a number of other grids. But your description of OpenAvatar, which I realize is strictly at this point about avatars and a limited number of their assets, for example, presumably clothing and certain kits that are part of your avatar. I'm wondering if you see any way that, or have any thoughts about how this could eventually extend to literally other assets that your avatar might hold, because at the end of the day, we're talking about virtual goods. And if you somehow were able to store all your virtual assets on a secure, trusted server somewhere and be able to import them with you wherever you go,
yes,
we'd be moving to a kind of open system. And I was discussing it with Maria. I said, if the hypergrid gets so big that there are enough people there, eventually Linden Labs will start thinking about opening up the walls a bit and letting things in. And I was musing that, what would they do first? Allow you to export or just allow tourists to come in? And of course, if they are faced with a lot of people with virtual identities and avatars, then probably the first thing they'll want to do is bring down the walls so that guest avatars can come in and bring their assets with them, if you see what I mean. And we deal with virtual. I mean, even our MP3s are virtual goods for goodness sake. But we are increasingly building up assets, and it's almost as if these, I can foresee server systems that are open operators in their own right are a bit like our banks. They're going to store all our assets for us and allow us to transport them. And do you see any way in which OpenAvatar and maybe anything else linked to it will sort of help that?
It's a good point, well made. I'll cover the OpenAvatar thing, but I'd love to say something about the Second Life future as well. So OpenAvatar, we called it OpenAvatar because we were purely thinking about avatars. We had an issue. We were trying to solve that issue for ourselves, and we thought that it was something to solve for others as well. But once we built it, we quickly realized that there was no reason why it had to be avatars. We've played around with things like tables, chairs, that you could have different component parts to these chairs, and you can compose them to suit yourself, right? From OpenAvatar has this idea of a DNA file, and the DNA file is essentially your standard for, say, a chair, and you can define elements of what that is, and it could be size, it could be shape limitations, and then people can be hooking different components that are going to connect onto this rig or format together, so that I could come along to a library full of chair components and then put together my own chair, and then it'll generate this brand new chair that's never existed anywhere before because it's come from a range of different component parts. And I don't have to be an expert. I've just picked from a library, so I'm just being creative. I think that's got a huge kind of future to being able to build things out. And not only could it be building small pieces like chairs, but ultimately you could build whole templates of rooms, etc., from that kind of an approach. So we haven't gone nearly as far as what we want to experiment with that sort of thing, but because it's a open source software developer kit, that will be something that people can play with and figure out what they can do with. And I think that it's quite an exciting future for that sort of thing. I just want to say that as of September 2011, the software developer kit is available in a closed beta environment. So you get the code; it's an open source code, but it's currently a closed beta trial, and so anybody who's a developer and is interested in getting started with playing with OpenAvatar is very welcome to check it out. We have a channel or a group on Vimeo that's got some videos on it, and we'll include the link to that in the chat. And you can also contact us at openavatar@vastpark.com. That's the email address, and ask for access to the closed beta. But I wanted to say something about potential future of Second Life and opening itself up to the rest of the world. I would say that it's quite important in my mind for Second Life to have a web player which will allow them to support some format such as OEmbed, to mean that people can just use very simple embedding techniques to place a frame of their web player on any web page. Now, the benefit of that to them is this idea that they can, in fact, allow any web page to be a doorway straight into the Second Life environment. The question is that a good idea for for Second Life to actually do that?
It's strange actually because I guess it was late last year or was it earlier this year, but no, it was late last year because it's before their new CEO took over. They in association with a company called Gakkai, they put a streaming web version of Second Life on the web as a sort of test beta. And it performs surprisingly well. The principle actually is that it's streaming it like video, and there's another stream, an uplink stream, that's actually sending commands. And if you've got fast enough broadband, then it doesn't matter that the two aren't intricately connected. And I certainly went in there as, I don't know, Melbourne's guest or something, because everybody was a guest. And I, in fact, IM'd Robusta Sachs, who's our Metaverse TV CEO, and sort of teleported him over. So as a guest, I was actually able to meet a verified resident on the same sim, but he was in world and I was on the web. And it worked actually very well, even though it's not a strict embed technology. There's a couple of there's one very small open sim operator who recently claimed to have made a plugin that put the Second Life client on the web. Although in fact it was just a way. What it was doing was it was installing the main client and launching that through a cleverly disguised sort of wrapper. But as you mentioned earlier, there's things like Unity 3D, and you may know of Tipper Dean. That's Chris Collins, who used to be at Linden, of course, a fellow Australian. And
I know Chris.
We put. I've set up my reaction grid estate on the web that way. It's rudimentary, but it kind of works. And I was discussing with Maria last week the being involved with television. We try and promote virtual worlds by putting immersive spaces and events and programs like this on the web as video for people who don't actually yet come in. And to me, the next stage is that wonderful little button under the video that takes them a step further. It says, join the audience. And instead of launching Second Life or whatever and taking them into a fully fledged client that they've got to learn, there should be a way, they have a window on the web that at least allows them to take a seat and do basic things like turn around and ask questions of the people who are there. And then we can have a third button that says, yeah, you like this? Then get the whole hog. Here's the button that takes you into the big job.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good kind of like step through kind of approach, where you're not actually being asked to make any sort of commitment. And it's shifting you from this lean back experience where I'm not having to actually do anything to, by a series of steps, going to a lean forward one, and you should be able to jump into the lean forward at any time. But that interim kind of one where you're wanting to participate in the live event, I think is a terrific one. In fact, though, one of the challenges with that idea that Second Life had of trying to kind of mirror what OnLive are doing. I don't know if people know OnLive.com, but it's a gaming platform that you can just instantly play the latest games without having, without even having a computer, right?
Mm.
You can do it on your TV. You get this little box, and it's because they run a computer for you, a server that actually acts as the client that follows your instructions. The challenge with that is the economy. In something like OnLive, the way it works is you're on a subscription, and it's $10 a month. Now, I'm guessing that they have to have fairly large numbers to make that work, or maybe I'm wrong about that. But the cost factor is you're effectively paying $10 a month to have a server there and available as your machine to use whenever you want. So for gamers who are hardcore gamers, that may be a challenge, or hardcore virtual world users who are not paying that $10 a month, it's not actually going to make economic sense for somebody like Second Life. So I don't think they're going to widen it up for everyone to use it. It'll be too expensive for them.
Yeah, I think so, especially, if it's 7 months high. I think Kai was a bit like On Live, the one they tried it on, but there was a limited number of sims that were being put online. You could actually, it was rather odd, once you'd actually got in, and the teleport will work to actually take you out of the sim that was part of the beta, but it's very strange. But it was actually delivered as video, so in a way, the concept was more like subscribing to a television station, except the television station is an interactive environment, a sort of constant stream. So, I mean, I can imagine that there are mechanisms by which servers can actually handle an awful lot of people, but they're not fully immersive sort of experiences like Second Life and, the other platforms are. But for audience, there's nothing to stop us putting on an event and saying, come along in a live viewer and take a seat. And you come in as a guest, and actually all you do is you take a seat. There may be no physical avatar there. You may be just, getting a first-person view. So I think we're going to see more of these things coming online, especially with the entertainment.
I agree. And you look at the strength of HTML5, the take-up of HTML5 has been a lot faster than I think we could have predicted or at least been certain of. And so I think this is really great because it's going to mean that you use a little bit of virtual world experience, technology to match in with a chat interface, etc., right there in a web page. And now you've got kind of a client, but it's much of it it's occurring right through web technology, so that can all shift across onto mobile devices, etc., that may not have the 3D window but could have a video stream or whatever. So we're getting to a really flexible point in the technology that's very exciting for this industry to become mature and actually be in a position that the average person gets to experience it.
Absolutely. Well, believe it or not, this always happens. You think, how are we going to fill an hour? And before you know it, it's gone, even with my little crashes and so forth. I've just got an IM from Duza. She hasn't actually got any questions for us, so we needn't go into that bit. Whether that's due to our crashing and whatever, I'm not quite sure. But the thing I've taken to sort of asking at the end of these shows, basically, is, put you on the spot, basically, and ask you, in terms of what I think we can generally call the future of the metaverse, or even the Internet of Things, as I know you're very fond of saying.
Right.
What would you like to see? What is your dream, as it were, or the thing you're most looking forward to? We don't know what the future holds, but what do you imagine happening, and what will be the best thing you can imagine happening?
Well, I actually think that even though WebGL is not mature yet, just HTML5 generally is going to bring so much to our industry, and going to reduce the need for plugins, and that means that the barriers to getting past enterprise IT teams is going to be out of the way, and we can actually start to deliver these experiences. So that's what I think is critical. Ubiquity.
Yes. Indeed. I agree. I totally agree. Okay, well, I guess we'll leave it there. It's been wonderful having you here. Later on in the series, we're actually hoping to sort of have a sort of reprise, get a few people back, and actually have more open discussions with several of us sort of together, as it were. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you back at some point. But meanwhile, it's been absolutely great having you here. Really informative sort of roundup.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for your time, and hopefully it's useful to hear a little bit about what we've been doing and what that might mean for the direction of some, a broader set of technologies other than just Second Life. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you. And just before we go, I'd remind you that this is technically it's a fortnightly series. I know we've had 2 in a row the last couple of weeks, but we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, and my guest will be Justin Clark-Casey of OpenSimulator.org. So hope you've enjoyed the show. My thanks again to Bruce, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye for now.